know you've put out a lot of actually really good information on Ethereum. So why don't we start there? What are your thoughts on that asset overall?
Well, so I think smart contracts are a useful tool. Like I think it's good that some of those platforms exist. I think decentralized exchanges are a good thing, and I think decentralized liquidity providers are a good thing. But then the main question from there is there's a couple things. One is if you have protocol specific issues, like Ethereum's going through an issue now where it's transitioning from proof of work to proof of stake. They have throughput issues which are more of a problem for Ethereum than Bitcoin because Bitcoin, the transactions tend to be pretty high value. And there are off-chain solutions for smaller transfers of value. Whereas Ethereum, it's a more high velocity, smaller average transaction size network, and the transactions are more complex. And so if you're paying a very high fee to do a Uniswap trade or just to move your tokens around, that's more of a problem for that network. It's kind of in order to work as you'd expect it to, the fees should be pretty cheap. And so it basically the success of using it kind of hurts itself. And so we see things like Tether transactions started moving more and more towards Tron of all things, at least a smaller Tether transaction. So we got to the point where more Tether transactions are occurring on Tron than on Ethereum because of the high fees, even though there's more settlement value in Tether on Ethereum because the high transaction size ones still stay on Ethereum. And so overall, you have that technical risk of I've basically changing the engine while you're driving, right? So we're driving the car, we have an operational blockchain, and we want to go ahead and change everything about it. And that's, of course, just a very challenging technical thing to go through. Then there's the kind of the broader question of even if you have a very successful utility protocol, do the tokens become money? Like, do the tokens accrue monetary value in the long run? And there's that paper from 2017 from John Pfeffer that argued that they probably would not. That even if you were to have high quote GDP in that ecosystem of utility tokens, that those tokens would be treated more like working capital, and so they wouldn't kind of accrue value in the same way that Bitcoin might. And it doesn't really preclude, like, it doesn't mean they can accrue monetary value, but it means they're basically whether or not they're going to be monetary value is largely separate. So you can have the ecosystem grow very large where the token value kind of stagnates. If you go back, that was published in late 2017, and since then, the amount of value settled on Ethereum's gone up substantially. It's like tripled. Whereas the market cap is roughly where it was 3 years ago. Briefly got a lot higher. Since the correction, I haven't checked it the last couple of days, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of the same market cap. So the market cap has not increased at the same rate as the transaction value as. And so that's kind of my concerns with the overall kind of utility protocols is that while I'm glad they exist and I think there's interesting development being done there, I haven't seen a compelling case of why I'd want to hold a significant amount of their tokens long term.
Yeah, so what do you think about the development of the entire crypto ecosystem over the course of the next, say, 10 years? Because I think even the proponents kind of fall on one of two different spectrums, right? Which you've got, kind of for lack of a better term, the Bitcoin maximalists, right? And they say, hey, look, I really understand Bitcoin, that's going to have value over the course of the next, basically its lifetime. And then, there's this kind of other view where you look at it and said it's a governance and incentive mechanism, right? And it's this very cool new way of structuring and owning networks, and that's going to allow you to do all this really cool stuff, kind of starting with financial markets, but branching into all of these other different types of companies. That's really going to be a super disruptive force. If you had to kind of pick between those two narratives, where do you fall on that spectrum?
A little bit of both. I mean, I think it still is an open question because I mean, the last thing you want to do is underestimate it. Like, all those quotes of people saying about the internet, like, oh, it's like it's never going to amount to much, and like,
Right. It's
you don't want to
it's
be one
never
of
going to be
those.
more valuable than the fax machine. Someone said that. I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
Paul Krugman.
Yeah. You don't want to be like quoted like that 20 years later. And so there is certainly a lot of potential there. But at the same side, it's like one of those things where when something's new, it's like you want to apply it to everything, even things that it might not be best applicable for, or you might overstate what percentage of people want to have decentralized apps. So a lot of people like centralization. A lot of people just want things to be easy. They trust their providers, and there's only kind of a small percentage of us that might want to have just more kind of independence in that way. And so you could potentially be overestimating the market size of certainly these applications. I do think that some of these like highly expensive non-fungible token prices will maybe not be looked too favorably on years from now.
So you're
Uh,
not going out and buying those little crypto punks selling for $700,000 or whatever they're
no,
selling for.
I'd rather buy like 12 Bitcoins, for that price or whatever the number is. And so
Yeah.
overall, I think that there's a lot of interesting potential. I do think that, like we talked about, I think decentralized exchanges in some form are here to stay. I think decentralized liquidity providers are here to stay. The question is how big they get. There's also, if you look at the Lightning Network, I think that there's really interesting developments there. And so that's one of those things where because the Lightning Network is not really about trading, it hasn't blown up in the same way that DeFi has on Ethereum. But there are, really kind of interesting developments happening that slowly but surely, and it doesn't might not get as much press. But for example, now you have major exchanges using Lightning. That's kind of a recent development, more and more. And then of course we have Strike Global, where you're basically doing fiat to Bitcoin back to fiat transactions, and basically it's an improvement over international remittance and international currency changes, international money flows. And then, going back to the utility protocols, I mean, even that uses stablecoins as an option. So you can do fiat to Bitcoin to stablecoin on the other side. And so I do think that stablecoins are here to stay for a while, and I do think that some of these applications are interesting. You also have things like Sphinx Chat, where you can basically, you connect basically it kind of weeds out spam, and it's a useful way to do micropayments. And so I do think that the whole space is just worth watching. I do think that stable coins, some degree of smart contracts, and some of these improvements over kind of these legacy plumbing systems for finances are a net benefit. And I mean, even looking at Bitcoin, that is one of those things where finally a piece of the puzzle came in. And so a lot, what Satoshi did was like he didn't invent blockchain. He just basically took existing things that were kind of separate and he solved a problem that people have been trying to solve with the right mix of solutions. And so Bitcoin was the first one to succeed on, say, eCash in ways that previous types of eCash didn't. And so I think it's like we're seeing that now, and we'll see kind of the wars between the utility protocols, and we'll see if we end up with multiple utility protocols, or if we end up with kind of one or two dominant utility protocols. We'll see how that sorts out. But overall, I do think that the overall industry has a ton of promise. And like I said, I'm really watching the Strike Global thing to see, to what extent that takes off. I do think it's good that a lot of these programs are kind of poking the existing system and kind of finding ways to do things better. And it's a shame that there's a lot of scams in the industry that it's kind of tied to speculation, and so people they naturally pour into the riskier parts of the market, and then they end up by the time the cycle's done, you're back in a bear market. It's kind of like, well, how much did you benefit from it? Because if you got into the really long tail of alts, a lot of those statistically like don't make it, a full, a full couple market cycles. If you got into leverage, you might have been right on certain things, but then when the bear market, you get wiped out. And it's just really the people that are kind of focusing on the really long term and kind of keeping their risk in check that I think will benefit from this.